slides.
Так, прошу.
Ага, зараз.
Okay, please. Just give me a second. I will start my presentation with a short video filmed at one of the media outlets working in the temporary occupied territories. The education process in Kherson region has resumed after the holidays on November 7th. Over 300 students went to the Gingin school here. The Minister of Education of the Kherson region, Mikhail Rodikov, gave the lesson on the VIA1 family topic. There was no Ukraine, no Kazakhstan, no Belarus, there was nothing. There was a Russian Empire, a single state, in which there were certain territories that were ruled by the Russian Empire. There was no Pribaltica, no Transcaucasia, nothing. It was a single state. Those lands that existed in 1917, they were a little different. For example, the general government of Poland was a part of the Russian Empire. Finland was a part of the Russian Empire. So we see a small fragment by the Minister of Education, so-called Minister of Education of occupied Kherson region. And what he said raises a question. I mean, this so-called brief excursus into historical geography creates a questions for researchers. What territory, what kind of map are they trying to recreate in the course of so-called special military operation? What kind of map they have in their heads? Based on this speech, we may assume that is it like the borders of Catherine's or Alexander's Russia, or is it the RSFSR, the Soviet Union, or even the map of the Soviet Union map, or even it's just a even a map of spheres of influence created according to the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop protocol. Since this so-called Minister of Education calls Poland as a general government. The general government of Poland existed during the Third Reich. So my presentation is called Geography of Special Military Operation and Space Production in the Occupied Territories of Ukraine. The choice and usage of toponym is an important ideological marker. After all, any toponym has its own nationality, ethnic origin, ideological roots, attachment to the certain era, state, social, and gender connotations. Even the nuances of spelling and pronunciation are sometimes crucial. Choosing the option to pronounce and spell Belarus or Belarusia, Pribaltica or the Baltic states, in Ukraine or on Ukraine. It says a lot about the source, about the speaker and the author. The same streets, settlements and regions were called differently at different times. And the choice of one or another option is also of great political importance. Even the seemingly neutral geographical directions like north-south or west-east have important geopolitical connotations or civilizational connotations. The classics and the followers of the post-colonial theory and critical geography, Edward Said, Said Maoz Azaryahu, Ruben Rose Redwood, and others wrote about this. In this article, we propose to focus on the usage of different toponyms in the public description of the theater of military actions during the special military operation and within the territories occupied as a result of this campaign. In addition, we will use other markers and relate to public space names and businesses and medias, such as business names and media names, public
заходи
events
в міському
in urban
просторі.
spaces, branding and heraldry, which is called coats of arms and flags, monuments and memorials, as well as even the outdoor advertising. All these elements of public space are filled with symbols of great political significance, which can be easily instrumentalized in order to create a new symbolic space, a new geographical reality, or recreate the old geographical reality. Our task during this part of this research is to find out what kind of spaces are produced in the course of the so-called special military operation and what are the potential goals of this process.
I will say a bit more. I have defined three vectors. The first one is Russian imperial vector. The first during the military operation was actually this imperial geography and its toponyms. In the beginning of April last year, Russian media started to talk about plans to recreate the Taurida governorate, which existed in the territory of present-day southern regions in the beginning of the previous century. And in April, the State Duma deputy from Crimea, Mikhail Sheremet, declared that, in his opinion, it was the time for historical justice and restore, I'm going to cite it, to restore the historical borders of the Taurida governorate that existed as part of the Russian Empire. Since there are no such things as governorates in modern Russia, so they decided to create the Taurida Krai, like Krasnoyarsk Krai or Stavropol, which would include the part of Kherson, Mykolaiv, part of Zaporizhia regions, as well as Crimea and Sebastopol. In April, the similar statement was made by the senator from Crimea, Serhiy Tsekov. Earlier, he offered to restore a such called Crimean district, and this was proposed earlier by the head of the Crimean Tatars. But this initiative did not work, and the statements of the Crimean politicians, which of those people who are mostly interested in this way of development, it was not actually developed. Attention to this project of restoration of this Taurida governorate was very noticeable in the occupied areas, especially in the Zaporizhia region. In this area, they were celebrating 220th anniversary of Taurida governorate. They placed billboards in the streets and on highways, including the participation of the Russian rock singer Yulia Chicherina. You can see her in this slide. At the background, there is this billboard. There were different lectures held and exhibitions, including the Russian Historical Society participation. In Zaporizhia region of the occupied territory. So she says that all the Taurida cities were created in the Russian Empire and during the Soviet Union, and it's high time to come back to the sources. So here Chicherina says that all the cities of Toria were created in the Soviet times. It's complete nonsense. And now the capital of Taurida is actually in Genechisk, which was created long before the Russian Empire. Genechisk already existed, but you know, they use such information, false information, in their discourse, trying to restore, to create the Russian Empire. So there were also created several important enterprises using the word Tavria, like Hub Tavria Energy. This is the former Zaporizhia power company, Post of Tavria, newspaper, News of Tavria, a lot of channels using this name like Z Tavria, Taurid Territory, Taurid Truth, and so on. Then you can see this vector in public, in social networks. This picture appeared. Then the cow owners were required to cover the Ukrainian code of arms on car license plate with the sticker showing the coat of arms of Zaporizhia region and the abbreviation TVR, which means Tevria. And according to the one official from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Zaporizhia region, he is notoriously known from the Russian Spring of 2014. I'm going to cite him. The initiative of the residents of the Zaporizhia region, the Black Sea region, which symbolizes their desire for restoration of the historical symbols, for reunification with Russia. Here we must note that this toponym Tavria or Taurida, it has also Soviet, Ukrainian, and even German connotation. This name appeared a long time ago in Herodot works. So there are different views on that. And Russia remembered about this history just to justify its expansion in the 18th century to the south. And the territory of annexed Crimean peninsula. So here you can see different variants what Tavria means. In black, you see the borders of the Tavria government. This was their Han territory, and the center was Simferopol. After these governments were liquidated in the in the Soviet Union, so they forgot about Tavria. And here we can see the territory of current-day Kherson region, which is the northern Tavria area. So in this toponym appeared in media when they started to build Kakhovska power station on Dnipro, just to give water to the steppes of Kherson and the region. So these lands, arid lands, they actually have this name of Tavria. And in independent Ukraine, we started to use this name actively as the name for organizations and companies or different goods to show that they were produced in the south of Ukraine. So it's just like a popular name, quite spread to signify the area of production. So this is how at the beginning of the 21st century, we understood, the Ukrainian people understood the meaning of the word Tavria. At the same time, in Crimea, especially after 2014, they started to use the names also with Tavrida Tavrический, and they showed like their territory expansion principles. The Kreml was actually ready to join the southern Tavria to their territories to provide this land corridor for their movement. Actually, they implemented these forecasts. Some toponyms started to be identified in Kherson area, for example, in relation to the city of Oleshki. They started to name it in Russian sources Alyoshki. It's actually an important thing because this occupational authority, they decided to use the imperial name for it, the name which existed till 1917. Though they were actually talking about the renaming it back to Tsuryupinsk, but the name of this person whose surname was Tsuryupinsk actually was not famous and it was not returned. Anyway, in Kherson, these Tavria names were quite spread. For example, the original TV and radio company was renamed as Tavria.
And of course, the name Novorossiya, it's also a name of historical region, literally meaning the New Russia, which has been actively used to justify the Russia's territorial claims to Ukraine since 2015 has not disappeared. This toponym also has an imperial background and was often used by Russian President Vladimir Putin in order to emphasize the belonging of the part of Ukrainian lands to Russia. Over time, Novorossiya began to replace or supplement the concept of the Southeast, which in turn went back to the Southeastern Ukrainian Autonomous Republic, which they tried to create in 2004 on the territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa regions, and even Autonomous Republic of Crimea. However, later the Crimea was separated from this project. In this sense, even this neutral name, geographic name, Southeast, in relation to Ukraine is destructive. Not surprising that even on Wikipedia, such an article on Southeast exists only in Russian. The Southeast, this is such a hidden cryptic name of Russian-speaking pro-Russian region. Also, there is a huge difference between its constituents, for example, between the deeply urbanized Russian-speaking Donbass and Ukrainian-speaking rural areas of the Kherson regions. There's a great difference between them, and even northern part of Luhansk region, the population is very different. And it's clear in the electoral history. By the way, this Novorussia, this district, it even covered a part of Moldova, because sometimes even Transnistria is included, and some Austrian propagandists even include Abkhazia, so even a part of Georgia. But original Novorossiya is what shown on the map. The physical imperial marking of territory is also associated with the imperial project. For this, in 2002, a flag associated with the modern imperial movement in the Russian Federation was used, the gonfalon or Russian banner, a red flag with Jesus Christ and the inscription for the faith, the Tsar and the Holy Three United Rus. This Russian banner was the first occupation flag that was raised on April 6 over the building of the Kherson Regional State Administration. However, on the same date, it was removed. Also, the Russian banner was repeatedly featured during mass events in the occupied territories, celebrations of memorial days, procession, and car rallies. For example, on this picture, you can see the armored personal carrier carrying the Russian flag, the victory flag and the gonfalon, which is the imperial flag. The imperial past of the occupied territories was also emphasized by attention to the imperial military and political figures of the Russian Empire. The Empress Catherine the Great, Marshal Alexander Suvorov, Admiral Fyodor Ushakov, Prince Grigory Potemkin, Pushkin, Davidov, Fet. By the way, that has nothing to do with the occupied territories. The names were used to promote the Russian past of the region on billboards, and their monuments, for example, Suvorov and Potemkin monuments in Kherson, became the venue for massive events and objects of constant attention of the occupation media. And the quintessence of this attention was the removal of monuments to Suvorov, Ushakov, Potemkin from Kherson by retreating Russian army, including even the coffin with the remains of Potemkin. And the invaders even called these remains the relics. You can see the article on the slide. Basically, apparently confusing they confused Potemkin with Ushakov, who in 2001 was canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church as the righteous warrior Fyodor Ushakov. Also, imperial geography was used through the heraldry of the imperial period. The occupied Kherson region received the coat of arms of the Kherson Governorate, assembled in 1802-1818. You see the double-headed Byzantine eagle. The Zaporizhia region received the coat of arms of the city of Alexandrivsk, assembled in the 19th centuries. And as one of the propagandists mentioned, the coat of arms was clear to the Ukrainian trace. And during the time of Ukraine, there was an attempt to replace the coat of arms. Instead of Russian soldier rifles, muskets were used. It was such a falsification of heraldry. We returned the rifles, returned everything that was in the days of the Russian Empire. So the muskets were instead of rifles on these flags. Also, it's very hard to distinguish musket and rifle for non-specialists. However, the special emphasis was made on this point, that Ukrainians replaced Russian rifles with muskets, which are probably like associated, I don't even know, with musketeers. Now we will talk about the Russian vector.
Мем про те, що армія РФ використовує
Basically, one of the mem during the start of the special military operation was the rumor that the Russian army uses Soviet maps from Second World War. Therefore, the armored vehicles often came to the wrong places, and soldiers could get lost even in a populated area, because during the last 30 years, the toponymy has changed significantly in Ukraine, especially the hedonymics, the names of squares, streets, etc. It was also some kind of like a measure of resistance when Ukrainians erased inscriptions on the road signs in places where the invaders were advancing. Yes, you probably know mask to drive entrance signs to settlements, tore off or ruins signs with street names. However, if you look at the reports of the General Staff of the Russian Federation Armed Forces, the use of the old Soviet names of settlements is immediately striking. And actually, this is a modern map. This is a modern map used by the General Staff of the Russian Federation Armed Forces. And there we see the settlements' names, not only in the occupied territories or places of active hostilities, but also in the depths of the country. For example, Russia stubbornly does not notice that Dnepropetrovsk is now called Dnipro, Krasny Liman is called Liman, Artyomovsk is called Bakhmut, Kirovograd is called Kropivnitsky, etc. Let's even disregard the fact that the settlements with communist names in or the separate parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, were also remained as part of the communization campaign in 2015-2016. However, in practice, the old Soviet names were still used here. However, like, see the map shows this the stubborn usage of these old Soviet names. The invaders also engaged in renaming the streets in captured settlement. Most often the Soviet names were reinstated. It was done consistently in Mariupol, where the invaders renamed Freedom Square into Lenin Square. The Marine Boulevard was renamed into Yas Communist League Boulevard. Miotina Boulevard was returned to its former name 50 years of October. Ukrainian Cossack Street was named after Orджоникідзе, etc. During the summer, an old district of the city signs with addresses in Russian were installed on the buildings. Similar renaming also took place in many settlements of Donetsk and Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Kharkiv regions. Sometimes the streets were signed with new, even more odious names. For example, in Melitopol, the street of Dmitro Dontsov Street, who was the ideologist of Ukrainian nationalism and a native of the city, was renamed into Sudoplatov Street, named after a native of Melitopol and an officer of the NKVD whom killed Leon Trotsky and Yevhen Konovalets. Later, a monument to him was also placed in Melitopol, and a volunteer battalion created by the occupying authorities of the Zaporozhye region was named after Sudoplatov. Also, Soviet heroes returned to the public space through pragmatonymics. For example, the names of various organizations and institutions. In the summer of 2022, university educational institutions were created on the basis of the building, were opened as the buildings where Ukrainian universities were located, and some of them were given names associated with the old names associated with the USSR or the Russian Empire, such as Melitopol State University received the names of the Soviet teacher As Makarenko. Kherson State University was left without a patron, also the pro-Russian rector of this university made the statement that Kherson State Pedagogical Institute, named after Krupska, was an example for her. Maybe she didn't have enough time to restore its name, to rename it after the Lenin's wife, to rename my university after the Lenin's wife. And Kherson State Maritime Academy also received the name of Fedor Shukov, added to the native also the name of Soviet Orders of Friendship of Peoples and Red Banner of Labor, the image of which soon appeared on the facade of the main academy building. You see the academy facade on this photo. Here, Kutuzov's monument once used to stand, which was stolen by Russians, and Kherson residents showed the painted Zaluzhny portrait on this facade, on this pedestal, on this postament. I guess I will. And in the public space, one of the key symbols of new authorities since February till March was the banner of victory, the assault flag of the 150th Order of Kutuzov of the Idritsa Rifle Division, which was hosted at the Reichstag on May 1st, 1945. And in the first months of the occupation, the flag of the Russian Federation was generally quite rare in the occupied territories. However, the banner of victory, this red flag, as you see on this slide, it was installed often on the captured administrative buildings, checkpoints, military vehicles, on the entrance stairs, flagpoles, and military monuments. Often the flag of the USSR was also used sometimes together with the banner of victory or with the flag of the Russian Federation or both. And often at the checkpoints, the banner of victory was raised higher than the flag of the Russian Federation or was larger inside. You can clearly see it on this photo. It shows the meeting of so-called government of Kherson region involving Kiriyenko, first deputy head of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation. This meeting happened during fall, and here you see the banner of the victory, which is larger than the Russian flag and is located in the central part of the wall.
Concerning the monuments, here they started to restore the monuments to Lenin the first was returned in Янічеськ, Kherson region. It was already on April 18th. They returned the monument which was there before 2015. So here you can see how it looked like actually before dismantling, and here during its return. By the way, yeah, they could not find this previous monument, and they found some other replica of it, quite shaded, just like we don't know where they could find it. In addition to Янічеськ, they returned the monument to Volchansk in the Kharkiv region, Melitopol. They restored it in autumn on the 5th of November. In Svetlodarsk, in Donetsk region, on the 3rd of December. I'm going to cite what they said at the opening ceremony. The mayor of the administration of Svetlodarsk. This is the restoration of historical justice. It is not only preservation of cultural heritage, it's also a tribute to one of the symbols of equality and social justice. They also announced that Lenin would be restored in Kherson, but this monument, when it was demolished, it was actually ruined, and it was not possible to put it back. And the other reason for not restoration of the monument was maybe because Lenin in Putin propaganda is a rather negative actor, because according to Putin, it was he who gave Ukraine part, who gave to Ukraine part of Russian lands. And it is his mistake that Putin is now trying to correct. That's why it was decided to put the monument to Empress of Catherine the Great instead of Lenin, but it was not realized because they had to flee Kherson. How much time do I have? Okay. So this Soviet essence of the occupied territories, it was actually emphasized by billboards on historical themes, which were depicting different cultural figures, writers like Sergei Bondarchuk, writer Sergei Lavrentiev, actor Viktor Matveyev, who was playing the Brezhnev's parts in the movies. In the Zaporizhia area, they also had the billboards depicting the Sudoplatov or heroes of the Soviet Union. So here you can see one of the examples from Kherson, which showed that during the Soviet Union, Kherson region, Kherson became the center of this region. So it's due to the Soviet Union that it was the capital of this region. So saying a bit about the Soviet vector, Russian federal vector rather. I will be quite short here. Actually, in the picture you see the demonstration, anti-Russian demonstration in Kherson. It was in April, and here they still have on the regional government building the Ukrainian banner. And Russian vector in the public space began to appear only in the second half of 2022. Although different monuments, occupied cities and villages started to appear quite soon. However, the flag of the Russian Federation was installed gradually. For example, in Kherson, over the administration building. In Kherson, on the administration buildings, it appeared on April 9th. although the building was occupied by the Russian military on March 2nd. And on the mayor's office, a Russian flag appeared only on April 25th. At blog post, you could not see it very often. You could more often see the flags of DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, or Lugansk, or some other Russian parts like Dagestan, Chechnya, North Ossetia. And advertising connected with the Russian Federation also appeared before referendums. So it was actually at the end of summer, beginning of autumn. These were the series of billboards and placards saying Russia is with you, Russia is love, we are one people. So a lot of things having the word Russia. The occupants also tried to rebrand actually the heraldics of this series. So in some way, they tried to change the coat of arms. Here you can see some banners for Kakhovka and Novopristan, new banners and coat of arms, and for Kharkiv region as well. These symbols were approved on the 8th of April by the occupants. Russian monuments did not appear en masse on the occupied territories. There are some of them, like monument to Sudoplatov, in Berdyansk to the Russian warriors. And there is one more important thing. Though there appeared quite often the three-color flag of Russia, this Russian Federation rector is not the single one. The famous propaganda man, the former Minister of Defense Igor Girkin, and the former governor of Kursk region Mikhailov, they said that, I'm going to cite, we continue to build inside the Russian Federation a small USSR, and the Russian card is not been played yet. Previously, they put the so-called victory banner, that is the flag of the USSR, and the flag of Russia more often. I believe such dual approach is not good. For example, take Azovstal, there was Soviet flag, why not Russian? Now they use the Russian flag as the main one because it turns to be absurd. If the special operation is conducted by the Russian operation, then there must be its flag. Are we ashamed of our flag? They are trying to be better now. So this is the end of the citation. I will make it a bit more shorter. I will get to the conclusions. So from the first day of the special operation, the invaders and collaborators paid a lot of attention to the restoration of space. So they were using this toponomic policy very actively. They used ideological symbols, quite seriously used outdoor advertising, both as some individual events and entire information campaigns. They try to de-Ukrainize or deprive of the people of their identity by introducing predominantly imperial or Soviet narratives. So during the so-called special operation, in the information space of Russia, there was created the idea that Ukraine is still in the space of Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, and this illusion is still maintained by using of different historical names of the regions and old toponyms. and soldiers of the Russian army fight and die for cities and regions that exist only on historical maps. They ignore Ukrainian realities. In generally, the level they reflect the level of understanding or not understanding of Ukrainian society. And this helps propagandists to shape their discourse of liberation and restoration of historical and geographical justice. To maintain this discourse in the occupied territories, they are marking this public space using the symbols of the imperial and Soviet times like flags, colors, branding, visual propaganda, outdoor advertising, of some visual pictures of liberation. But the modern federal vector of the formation of the symbolic space of the occupied territories is seen less intense than the imperial and Soviet vector. There is also a conflict between the ideas coming from above and aspirations from below, like personal aspirations of the participants of the war. Kremlin prefers the reconstruction of the Soviet space and does not sufficiently satisfy the imperial demands of some part of the war supporters. Returning to the words of Mikhail Rodikov, who is the Minister of Education, the question of what kind of map are they trying to recreate during this operation? There is no answer to this question. Even the people who are in charge of this military operation, they cannot answer it. The soldiers, they do not know the geography. There is no clear signal from the center, and in the on the places they just orient. They have this image, and their imagination actually plays a bigger part. So as a result, the participants of the special operation come into Ukraine to do what they are not allowed to do in Russia. They want to build an empire or communism or revive the monarchy or fight oligarchs and corruption or build a society of social justice and general welfare, which could not be created either in the Russian Empire or in the USSR or in the modern Russian Federation. This is the end of my presentation.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mykola, for such interesting, relevant research. Dear colleagues, please join our discussion, ask your questions, or you post in the chat. Please, Ms. Nadia. Thanks a lot, Mr. Mykola, for your interesting presentation. And I have, it's not a question, but rather a small comment. Because the materials you presented in, you analyzed it in a very interesting manner, it partially crosses the materials of my research. And I'm curious about this use of this victory banner as a symbol of that great patriotic war mythology, which is actively developed and actually promoted in Russia, and many concepts are based on this myth. And they also think that this myth is also rooted deep in Ukraine, so it should be as successful in Ukraine as it is in Russia. That's why I think they're using this flag, hoping that it will be well received. I think that it may be an important reason. Thank you once again for your presentation. Yes, I agree. I agree, but in your presentation you already mentioned that we have a laws introduced, but as soon as Russia enters this territory, this flag, well, if previously some people sympathized with this flag in the occupied territory, now it's gone. And I also missed one aspect, it's countermapping in the occupied territory. There is a resistance to the discourse mapping because this victory banners, they were removed, and the main victory banner at the Eternal Fire in Kherson was removed twice, and the Russians hang it one again to show as if they came here to stay here forever. And Kherson residents always painted Ukrainian flags on and hang the blue and yellow stripes on the trees. So indeed, the meaning of this, the symbolism of this victory banner has changed dramatically on February 24th. Miss Tatiana, please. Thanks a lot. It was extremely interesting presentation. And this topic is also close to me because I also study the memory, but I'm more focused on libraries and libraries industry. But I would like to stress that similar to Mr. Mykola, I identify this crossing of these vectors, imperial, Soviet, and Russian. And I also wondered why does it happen? I wanted to ask you, in your presentation, you mentioned that those who participate in this war against Ukraine and the top Russian leadership, they don't have some kind of consolidated vision of what they are fighting for. Someone fighting for Soviet Union, some are fighting for empire. Don't you think that this combination of features of various discourses, it may be just a technology, a manipulative technology? Because, for example, in library field, I sometimes notice synonymization of Russian Empire and Soviet Union. Such substitution takes place. For example, these territories right now, our communities, Ukrainian and Russian communities, have a common, comprehensible and close Soviet past. While the Russian Empire is something we know only from the books. We have never left during the we didn't live during the empire, and maybe this kind of mixture, this combination, substitution, is a technology to prepare our societies for larger aggression, for which not just European countries and the Russian society, both European countries, Russian society is not ready for this aggression. What do you think? Could it be used as this kind of technology? I think this is the manifestation of some kind of crisis, of ideological crisis and intellectual crisis. Yes, indeed, there are many crossing points between these two discourses, taking into account that the Soviet Union used the imperial narratives during the World War II. There were a lot of crossing points like Kutuzov, Ushakov, Suvorov. They returned to the public space of the Soviet Union during the World War II. I think this is a crisis, manifestation of the crisis, because they don't have a single answer, and they use like the method of educated guess to come up with some ideology understandable for a population. And it's obvious that if we compare the Zaporizhzhia Kherson region, the newly occupied territories, and we take Mariupol in the Donetsk region, it's clear that in the Zaporizhzhia region, the things with Tavria governor, all this Tavria and other names, they were promoted by Selivanov, who was a supporter of this imperial discourse, and he's a like active person who has a Telegram channel, several of them, and he promotes these narratives. In Kherson, we didn't have such empire supporters. There's also Kherson propagandists like such as Stremolsov. They preferred the Soviet era. Also, they also often confused historical facts. And Saldo, that was said a lot of delusional things during his speeches, such as we are proud of Pokryshkin. He was born in Kherson region. Also, Pokryshkin wasn't born in Kherson region. He calls him twice. Actually, I guess this is like an individual factor who plays an important role. And as for your question, I think it's rather the manifestation of crisis. Mr. Garner, please.
The floor is yours.
Mykola, thank you so much for really a brilliant talk. I wish I could ask my question in Ukrainian, but I cannot. So I will use English. I have worked on China for a very long time. And I noticed in the 1990s that historians of the Qing Empire, the last empire of China, were paid to travel to military bases to instruct soldiers about the history of China's imperial borders in order to justify future aggression in the South China Sea, which we are seeing now against Vietnam, Philippines, and so on. Maybe you said something about this, but I wondered whether the Russian government has sent people who know some kind of history, let's call it propaganda, to tell these soldiers about the history of the places where they're fighting. I think I heard you say the soldiers didn't really understand the history. I also wonder whether the Ukrainian government has been broadcasting information about history to counteract the Russian propaganda, or whether Ukrainians already know the history so well that they don't need to be told it again. Sorry that my question is so long.
Дякую, да, цікаво було порівняти.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very interesting comparison with the Chinese case.
Якщо у вас є робота на цю тему, я буду
If you have some research on this topic, I would highly appreciate if you can share a link with me or PDF file, because I would really enjoy reading it, because I would really interested in doing this comparative analysis. I was offered to research a Palestine case and Berlin case.
Мені невідомо про те, що посилали
I don't know exact cases of sending some kind of political and historical instructors to troops.
технологам, які займаються виборами.
I guess the political technologists, the election PR specialists were mostly responsible for it, the political technologists. And they actually,
Як сказати, небрежно.
and they were very negligent about this job. There was a lot of distorted facts, well-known facts that were distorted by them. Like, as I mentioned, what Chechnya said about all cities in Tavria were founded by Russian Empire, or that there was no like Caucasian regions. How can it happen? How? Because the Caucasian mountains, they existed from prehistoric times, long before the Russian Empire was ever founded, was ever started. So these propagandist functions, duties, they were mostly performed by these core speakers. In Kherson, there was a Kirill Stremolsov, who has died now, and in Zaporizhia, there were Rogov and Selivanov, and they spread this historical information. I mean, amateur historians were performing these duties. And so in this public informational space, both soldiers and civilians consume very poor quality content, pseudo-historical content, fake content produced by poorly educated amateurs or by politechnologists who search for some narrative, for some some historic narratives which can be used without doing very basic fact checking, without even open the Wikipedia, like this Fed case, where they claim that Afanasy Fed was for some reason is used as a symbol of imperial past of Kherson. The thing is that Fed once served as a military officer in historical region. Now it's Kirovograd region. It's very, very remote, very, very far. And the people were they decided, oh, it must be the same. And the locals won't even understand the difference. And as for Ukrainian narratives, well, I haven't noticed, because Ukrainian geographic purpose is very simple. The geographic essence of Ukrainian victory is very simple. It's clearly depicted on every map in every school. This is a map of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders, recognized by almost all countries in the world. The geographical purpose is very simple. It has never changed. Ukraine wants to reach its borders. So in this sense, well, of course, we can mention the Ukrainian anthems, that Ukrainian anthem, the lyrics of the Ukrainian anthem, it mentions some territorial claims like Ukraine from sun to dawn. However, this version, it wasn't accepted in the constitution. It wasn't accepted at the legislative level. Only the first verse is officially used as an anthem. So I've never heard anything about some like geographic goals or narratives in Ukraine other than the existing actually internationally recognized borders, recognized by the entire world. I hope I have answered your question.
Пані Оксано, будь ласка.
Miss Oksana, please. Hello, Mr. Mykola. It was extremely interesting presentation. And I was really interested when it was really curious, and I was impressed by these videos you showed us in the beginning. I was shocked not by these narratives, but by the fact that the Minister of Education of Kherson region delivered lesson to the students. What do you think? It's a kind of why the region has its own ministry? Even from the point, because of course it's absurd, but how it justifies it to create ministries, occupation ministries for a region? And have you ever researched the perception of these narratives by school and university students, other studies? Do they just listen to it silently? Do they respond in some way? Do they attempt to deny it? And if there are no research, so please.
Thank you for reminding me. Actually, Rodikov, this is a typical, I don't know who is he by background, if he's historian. He pretends to be a historian. He was talking about Stolypin, for example, saying that Stolypin was ruling Kiev. He never ruled Kiev. He was in Saratov Oblast, and in Kiev he was just killed. But concerning your question about the ministries, yes, actually, this is really an important thing in terms of discourse when they use these names of ministries, like playing with this local patriotism, like you are going to have this governor, real ministers. It's an interesting opinion. I think it has some sense, and maybe a strategy which also failed because the personnel. Now, for example, they are creating these ministers. They are all registered in the Kherson itself, which is not under the control of the Russian Federation. So half of these ministries are headed by people from the Russian Federation. Rodikov has no relation to Kherson. He used to work in Moscow as the deputy of the municipality of some region. And concerning these people, I have just some qualitative research. I had a lot of interview, and it all depends on the general political vision of the respondents. Most of the people in Kherson, they were pro-Ukrainian. It's evident on the migration which numbers which you could see during the occupation. Most of the people left Kherson region heading to the Ukrainian territories. Everything associated with the occupational authorities, whatever names they will choose, ministry or I don't know, some King's Chancellor's Department or whatever, it will be taken negatively. And people who are at the head of these ministers, they are Russians, or they are people who have very big corruption trail, and they were involved in some corruption scandals, were on the court. This the same Saldo man or Buluk, deputy of the governor. I even one time was distributing humanitarian aid in Kherson during occupation, and I met one granny who used to be in the Communist Party. She was in the leadership of the Communist Party, so she was actually supporting the military operation, and she was very happy that Russia is back. But at the end, she said, I don't understand one thing. How could they appoint Saldo here? He's a criminal. Everyone knows that he's a criminal. How, whatever you name him, the governor or the chief of the administration or the prime minister, he will be a corrupt person. Thank you very much, Mr. Mykola. Our time has run out, but we still have two questions, Mr. Maxim and then Ms. Maria. Thank you for your report. I have such a question. If the first sign of the country of the nation is language, so the second, I understood, are toponyms. Does Ukraine have any moral or state right to change the names of the streets? And how? What is your opinion about that? Day before yesterday, there was a big article on this topic. I can actually give you the link to it, and you will read it, because it's not a 1 second answer. I will send you the article. Thank you. Miss Maria, thank you very much for such interesting report. I have one question. If we go into the future, victory and then new public image of the area of Kherson and Kherson region, it's interesting to me if there is a public image, this person, so who is going from classical literature, these images of Tavria, images from Ukrainian literature, can they be incorporated in the future in such a way that it would be very similar, like the basement for development of a new public image of the future Ukraine? Because we speak about opus propus anthropus, this is place, space, how we speak about this space and how this space influences the behavior of people. Do you have any aspects, anything to say in this direction? Yes, I was working in the Kherson College of Homanyuk, and I remember I was reading I was reciting this poem of Kherson Prairies. I was reciting it. It's just the image of steppe Ellada. It's just the marking of imperial space. In our museum of Kherson, unfortunately, Russians stole a lot of things from it, but there was an exhibition of this Ukrainian area starting from antique times. And all this Tavria discourse, it was rethought, changed in the following years, and Ukrainian Tavria incorporated all those things we mentioned, like steppe ladder and the connection with antique times and connection with the indigenous people like Tatars. And this new Tavria, in difference to Tavrida, it will happen. We have even a special research on this Tavria. There was actually some like opposition between Tavria, Ukrainian Tavria, and the Imperial Tavrida. Tavria is actually freedom, it's free steps, and Tavrida, which is under oppression of Russian Empire. So Tavrida, it's just like, yeah, yes, thank you.
Дуже дякую, пані Микола.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mykola. We have some questions in the chat. Sarah has written several questions, and Larissa Kisluk. I don't know. Mr. Mykola had really very good offer to meet the colleagues. Could you say about it? Colleagues, I was thinking that we have such formal meetings during the reports. Maybe we can meet in some informal environment without our supervisors, just to get acquainted closer, to learn more about each other, have such co-working, closer connections, maybe build some partnerships. I hear that we have very similar research topics we can collaborate, and we would also discuss how we could spend the rest of our time in a more productive way, just to think about the future of our program. So I have such a proposal. It's on the 27th at 5 o'clock. We could meet in such informal atmosphere and talk about the program and how we can create such a networking and make it even better. Thank you very much. I don't want you to see us as your supervisors or whatever you mean, who are your supervisors, but I think we are the part of this community, and I would like to be perceived like that. But thank you for your initiative. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for such seminar. I can't stop being infatuated by the colleagues who have excellent research and who share the results of their research during our seminars. Thank you very much. It's really very interesting and educating. It's very good that we have such an interesting academic community. Dear guests, at this point we can finish our seminar. I would like to make one more advertising. Don't forget that on Friday we meet again. Ms. Tatiana Granchak is going to make a report at 10 o'clock. Right? Is it 10 o'clock by Kiev time? And at 11 we will have Rostislav Melnikov. They are in English language without translation. Thank you everyone very much for your participation And special thanks to our Ukrainian colleagues who participated, irrespective of any threats which you have now in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Wish everyone good evening. Bye bye.
Дякую, всього найкращого. До побачення.
До побачення, друзі.